So we can, so what we are discussing here about a way we can evaluate pipeline execution policies in isolation, it would be like, so in our pipeline, create pipeline service, we will be evaluating the GitLab CI YAML of the project, but then we have a step in the chain around here after we evaluate the workflow rules to enforce the policies. And this will be similar to do the fetching the content of the policy, processing it, which means like extracting if there is an include, normalizing it, and then evaluate the workflow rules of that policy file. And whatever jobs are left need to be added to the pipeline data structure. So what I'm saying for pipeline data structure, it's not the YAML anymore. It's more an abstract, like a hash of normalized jobs, but it's still like we call it pipeline data structure because it's not a pipeline object with stages and builds yet. But it's just a kind of a hash.
So the hash, quick question.
Yeah.
So I saw we do have some classes like CI job or stage and stuff like that. So that it's basically a hash, and the hash contains instances of those pipeline classes, right? Or is it just like
no, the hash just contains like a primitive data.
Okay.
So you can see it will be more something like YAML processor result. So yeah, so you can see that it's like a hash where each key is a job, and each job is like this normalized data. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Where we have defaults, like if you say when you don't specify that, we set it on success. So we have this normalized that all the jobs look the same, and we need to have a way of adding whatever jobs are coming from the policy YAML into this data structure, right? So what I'm thinking is maybe we could have something in config, where we have job stages. It could be something in config where we will have something like the add job, method. And here we will append this job to the data structure. Maybe it would be something like this.
Not sure.
Well, yeah, can you vocalize your thoughts?
No, I mean, I'm just not sure if we should modify the config. I mean, if we are adding something, I think we could do this at any step in the GitLab, any step in the create pipeline service. I mean, I'm not sure because this config object means that it is the config object of the pipeline. So I don't think we should add a job into the config. We should add a job into the pipeline. So this may not be the correct place.
Okay, this pipeline is not yet initialized.
Yeah, but my point is that this is the result of the YAML. So because it is YAML processor result, and this is CI config RB file or the object file. So this object or this YAML processor result object is the result of this CI config, the pipeline config. So I'm not sure if we should add any job from the policy into the config. We should add job into the pipeline object, not the config object. So I'm not sure if the pipeline object, but
yeah. I think it makes sense because then when we evaluate the policy, we will have a separate config object,
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Yes.
what I mean. Yeah. I have also another question, by the way, if I can ask. So,
Mhm.
I mean, you suggest that we add this enforce policies chain after the
Mhm.
evaluate workflow rules. But yesterday we talked about maybe a policy can have an option that a policy can run, even the pipeline cannot run. So, but here, if the evaluate workflow rules just not invalid, but it just breaks, the whole chain just breaks, right? So maybe this is not the right place to add.
So you mean like if a pipeline, so in this
Cannot
case,
run,
okay, if a pipeline has no jobs,
yes, with rule, I mean, because of the rules or workflow
so
rules.
that is will be in seed. I think.
No, I mean the evaluate workflow rules, by the way. No, I mean the previous one.
Oh, in this one?
Yes, if it prevents somehow to create the pipeline, so it just breaks the chain, as far as I remember.
Oh, here, yes, filter out.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
And yesterday we talked about it. Maybe we will have an option for the policy that, okay, this policy must run even the pipeline does not run.
Mhm.
So that's why
Okay,
maybe we
yes.
should add before. It may be a small detail, but I just wanted to mention we need to do this before the evaluate rules,
So
or just right after the commit process. I'm not sure.
mm,
I think also the idea was that we could evaluate the rules like separately. Like we could evaluate them for the project CI, and let's say the workflow rules say don't run the pipeline, and then we evaluate them again for policies, and then we just only run the policy jobs. But yeah, it seems like okay. I thought evaluate the rules means like it would kick out jobs from the pipeline that shouldn't run, but it seems like it so it breaks the whole chain. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So mhm. So we have two scenarios here. So one is moving this before evaluate workflow rules. But the problem here is that
I see.
If we move before, then
Yeah, we also
then
need to
we
modify the evaluate workflow rules.
yeah, but then what we'll do is we will evaluate the policy always if they are present. But let's say if we have this configuration where you say if there is no jobs after workflow rules, don't add any jobs from the policy, right? So we don't even need to fetch the policy YAML or do anything if there is no jobs after job rules.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
So we might need to modify this maybe condition here.
Yeah, we don't need to change so you are saying that we should still add the new chain after the evaluate workflow rules. We should still add the enforce policies after evaluate workflow rules, but we need to modify evaluate workflow rules, right? If there is something in the policy.
Because it's like I mean, this is something we can do it afterwards, like when we introduce this configuration. Because one thing is we have to do is, okay, pipeline, return if workflow passed. Otherwise, we drop the pipeline. But actually, one thing we should do is on here is like return if
policy enforced.
Yeah, enforce
Then yeah, okay. Then we should add this before
like we exit early. We kind of exit early. I mean, we don't return with an error and skip and break the chain, but we actually go to the next step.
Yes. Then we need to reverse the order of this chain, right? So we need to do this enforce policies before evaluate workflow rules. because that's where it happens. That's where we add policies. Maybe we need two chains. By the
No,
way.
I think here it will be just oh yeah, because we are still scanning for policies.
Yes. So maybe we need to add two chain
Yes.
here. One
Yeah,
is add policy. Yeah.
Yes, because we need to still scan for policies.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what to call it. All this will be like
add policies, let's call it.
Check execution. Whatever. It's just called like this for now. But so this will be like parse initial parsing of any policy YAML.
Mm-hmm.
So this gets like a high level metadata, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like here. So like will be whether to enforce policy jobs if pipeline is empty. Okay. So we do this, then we evaluate workflow rules. Continue if pipeline is empty, but enforce policy jobs. And then here we will do the so we have already extracted the policy and the content. So this would be
what's going to happen in the enforce policies chain, by the way?
In the enforce policies, so we already have extracted the content and we probably have saved in somewhere in our context.
I mean,
and
it's also related to the topic of this meeting. So, you know, the evaluating configs separately. So I am imagining that in the chain of enforce policies, we will call the create pipeline service again with the dry run option, maybe. Then we will have some jobs, you know, the evaluated jobs, and we will just can inject into the current pipeline. I'm just imagining this right now in the enforce policies.
I'm thinking of something like that.
Because dry run works great. And it doesn't create a pipeline. It just returns a YAML, right? We will have a YAML, merged YAML file. So we can just inject this into the pipeline. So maybe we can utilize this feature.
I'm wondering if is it
heck?
Well, dry run doesn't work for everything. There's some context that currently it's not supported. Maybe just is only at the interface level. I think through create pipeline service we can still support all possible use cases. But it's a different sort of evaluation because we are calling the create pipeline service in dry run, but passing in the policy YAML specifically.
Yes, exactly.
You need to evaluate this, but
with specific context. For example, we will not add the project as the context, right? Because we shouldn't add the project as the context here.
Yes.
Because and I had also another question from the yesterday meeting. So when we evaluate the workflow rules of the policy, we shouldn't use any variables from project, right?
Correct.
Yeah, like from you mean like group and like variables defined in like project settings?
Yes, we shouldn't use them because that's how they manipulate the policy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So we need to also define the context here. What variables should be available for the policy? I think the answer is maybe just group variables, or I don't know, maybe the group variables.
We need to define the context, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm in two minds whether we need to use the create pipeline service, because there can be a lot of boilerplate
Okay.
Involved there, and maybe we'll need to add customizations, in place to be able to do this. Maybe we just can create a chain of the step, like a step of the chain, and then which is like a mini create pipeline service somehow. Because we need to create a new, basically do the config content, but passing in the policy YAML, process it, do some kind of after validation, and then do the workflow rules. And the context needs to be maybe seed,
because we need to also run the rules for each job in the policy independently, or I don't know, should it be independently or dependently? I mean, should the rules of the jobs in the policy be dependent the main pipeline or not? It would be very confusing feature.
Yes.
Like you mean, so the way I understood it was that the rules are only valid for the jobs of the policy. Like, for example, if the project pipeline says don't run, like whenever, and the policy says always, it should only run the policy jobs, even though I'm not sure if this is actually a good idea, because policy jobs might depend on project jobs. So maybe
they shouldn't depend on project jobs. I mean, that's where that's why we confess that we don't know maybe the feature yet. I mean, I'm just talking about myself. Yes. I don't know the feature very well. So should the jobs in the policy depend on the project jobs?
I think it's I think there are different use cases. I think the best use case is if they're independent of project jobs. But I think some users have to make them dependent. For example, for some scanners, they need to have a build first of the project to scan it. So there's, so in some cases there are dependencies. So I think we probably have to support kind of both cases. Yeah, this makes me think we probably should, like, if the policy says run the pipeline, we should always like run the full pipeline. I'm not sure if it makes sense to run only the policy jobs.
So okay, so let's describe a few things that we need to flesh out more. So the context, variables when evaluating the workflow rules in the policy. Okay, should job rules be evaluated for merging jobs or after? This depends on what kind of constraints we want to have, especially around variables and things like that. The other question I had is, it's possible that there are multiple policy YAML defined, right? There can be one at project level, one at group level.
Yeah.
So do we want to have all these policies defined separately, like evaluated separately? Because then it means, like, if you have 10 policies, then you potentially are calling create pipeline service 10 times, right?
True. Yeah. Or we could.
Definitely, we're going to have a limit, in the numbers of policies. We have to have a limit. So first of all, have a limit for the number of policy. will be 3 max, or even 2. And we can extend from there. But like, so one a project level, one a group level, initially, because the more we add, the more the longer this pipeline creation will take. If we have to evaluate everything, like in a separate sandbox with separate context, there are some aspects of the context that we need to take in consideration. One is when we evaluate the policy YAML, I think we need to take in consideration like the limits that the config context has. For example, currently when we do the processing of a config, there's a few things like the timeout, number of includes that you can have. So a few limits like this. And if we generate a new context for every file, it means we are having like 3 times higher limits, right? Because like we want to expand this config, the policy YAML, and then we need to have maybe includes, and that can take time, and we have also limit number of includes. If we generate a new context all the time for every file, then we are scaling this limit. Another option is we could have a single context for all policies. Yeah, so
I also took, sorry, it's not related to the scalability or limit, so I will just ask completely different question, because I think we will somehow be able to solve this scalability or limit problem, but we have some main concerns here how these policies work. So I just added the final note here. So should any policy be completely independent from the projects? I mean, it means no dependency of the project variables, jobs, files, etc. So I am imagining this scenario. Maybe it makes sense or not. So I don't know the answer. So a policy can only have 2 stages, pre and post. That's all. No other stages can be used in a policy, let's say in this scenario. So it means that, and also you cannot use any variables from project. You cannot use any, I don't know, rules that depends on the project, like, the existed file or changes that file example. So it is completely independent from the project. So you just have a policy file and you just evaluate this policy file depending on the group variables and group context. And at the end of this evaluation, you will have some set of jobs, and those jobs either in the pre stage or in the post stage. And then you just add these jobs into the pipeline. That's all we are doing. Yes. Does it make sense according to the product perspective of this feature, not the technical side? Andy, I think you heard the answer.
Yes, so I think by default, yes. So we don't want, for example, the project pipelines or sorry, projects variables or group variables to be considered part of during the context evaluation context, because then you can have something like okay, I declare a very specific variable in my project that somehow disables the jobs or modifies the way the jobs run. But not having access means also who writes the policy YAML needs to write the YAML in a way that doesn't depend on a project variable or something like that. That's one thing. Grant yesterday was saying that there are some customers that might want to specifically allow some variables to be defined at project level so that they can control, they can have some level of control over the jobs defined in the policy. So I think in this case it will be more something like where we do some kind of like allow list for some variables.
What's the use case, maybe?
Maybe Andy, you know some use cases?
I don't know about the variables. The only use case I know was that we actually don't want to allow any variables from the project level. But yeah, I think this is one of the problems with the features because they're used in very different ways, and some people want to allow it, some people want to disallow it. But I think the basic idea for this feature was that you can really like enforce the policy on a project, and the project has no way to interfere with it and to circumvent the policy.
So I think it will be something, by default is isolated. But then you could write something like client's job, something like, script tools if my project var equal test, it's something like that, for example, or variable whatever. Sorry,
what's that syntax?
I'm making a mistake. Let's say it's something like that. So now you have, by default, you will not have access to this. So you will not be able to do, define my project var. This will actually will be not evaluated, not expanded. So this is basically saying, okay, we don't recognize this variable, right? By default, if you write a policy YAML like this, because you don't want somebody to define in a project a variable that can actually control this. So we avoid that. But there could be some
scenario, right? It will also not work because we will not run any project variables here. So I mean, it will not be
so
the
project variables will not be added to the context. So this variable will not be recognized. But there could be scenarios where some customers do want to allow some variables to be accessed, to be defined, so they can have some control. Like, okay, you need to run whatever a dust scan, regardless. You can set up this a variable to choose which dust profile makes more sense for your app, but a scan will have to run regardless. So maybe there could be something like that, dust job, and here is like my dust profile. Okay, whatever, so something like that, right? Or even in the script, dust profile, my dust profile, something like that. Okay, so the job will run, will be added to the pipeline regardless. You have no control of whatever you're doing. But if you don't specify my dust profile, for example, the pipeline fails, and you can't merge the merge requests, for example, right? So, but how do we allow this variable from being defined? So I feel like where we define in the policy YAML, we have name, description.
It's like inherit allow list.
Something like a variable, allowed variables, and you could have like my dust profile. So if we find in our project variables, we find something called my dust profile, we'll include it. So there could be maybe some project variables that by default is empty. But if something matches like an allowed, like a variable from the allowed list, we can actually pass in.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, if I have a question. So if we don't allow any project variables right now, should we?
Yeah.
I mean, are we covering 90% of the use cases, or maybe 95% of the use cases? I'm asking this. Maybe we should. I mean, we should maybe not think about it right now. I mean, okay.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah,
I
we
think
are
you're
just
right,
not yeah, we are just not allowing any project variables, and that's it for
Yeah.
now.
Now the problem is, so we can do this during the pipeline creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when we are serializing the variables for a specific job, right? Or variable, yeah, or like variables for a job, but sometimes we need to calculate the dependent variables for dependencies and stuff like that.
I just got
sorry.
I just got a message from Zoom that we're going to be kicked out because there's something wrong with my subscription. So if you're going to kick out, we can just try to rejoin the meeting.
Okay.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, sorry.
So if we, so the problem is also after we persist the pipeline and the jobs, when we reload this job and now it's called Dust job that is appended to the pipeline, right? So let's say by default we don't have any allow list here, right?
Yeah. Okay.
By default. If I set up something like this, maybe during the pipeline creation, this would fail, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Whatever. Okay.
So,
we just got kicked out, and now we can continue.
So what I'm saying is, if we use something like this during the pipeline creation, this will not be evaluated because my project var, we will not include my project, all the project variables in the evaluation context. But if I have something instead here, and that my dust profile, okay, and this is like a project variable, okay. So this job will be added to the pipeline, okay, but in theory, this should fail somehow, right? Because you don't have access to this variable, and now maybe the command fails, something like that.
It's empty.
Yeah, but how do we distinguish a persistent job that when we regenerate the variables, when we take this job, we send to the runner, we have to serialize all the variables, that we should not include project variables?
I don't think we should disallow that. I think this is what we wanted, right? I see your point. You mean that, okay, so projects can override this variable easily, and runner, I mean, they can misuse this script, right?
Yes.
That's what you mean. Okay, I see.
So should my dust profile should not be available in the pipeline creation, but also in the job execution either, right? So if to do something like this, it means that we need to have in the job. It's what I was saying yesterday. This compliance job somehow, the way we persist in the database, needs to have something like maybe in the options.
You want to use inputs, right, Fabio? You want to use inputs.
Why?
I mean, the inputs, it's just evaluated and passes to the runner. So if we use inputs here, we just evaluate from the group variables and we just pass it to runner. So no one can modify it.
How do we use inputs in this case scenario?
I mean, okay, we are not just accessing this, this $, my dust profile. We are just writing an inputs as input syntax. So we will evaluate this inputs while we evaluate the policy YAML file. So we will end up a job that has a script and in plain text, no variables.
But the problem is that the project pipeline doesn't include the policy YAML. So who defines
yes.
the runtime inputs? Where do they find the runtime inputs that need to be passed to the policy YAML?
Yeah, no one. We are just accessing variables through inputs. That's what I mean. I mean.
Oh, so you mean something like
yes.
So more like end.
Exactly.
My project.
And we will evaluate this. And we will have a plain text. Of course, the only downside, I think, it's maybe it is a masked variables. So we will end up storing these variables in plain text. So that should be that may be the problem here, because it is written in the runner logs.
Yes, but sometimes it doesn't even have to be. It could be that maybe it just like that. It just runs as a dust, but it expects the variable to be added to be present and exported.
Okay.
So in that case, so it could be things like that as well. So I think what I was saying, like when we save the compliance job, we need to have a way of persisting some extra information, maybe in the build metadata, that is like is that a policy? No, policy job true, for example. Maybe even the allow list, vars allow list, right? As is defined in the policy. So it means this vars allow list is always going to kind of cascade to all the jobs in that policy, right? And this by default will be empty, or we don't even store it at all, initially. But then eventually we could store this as well, and you can say, okay, now if you want to make sure that that specific project variable is available, we can specify that in the job allow list, which means like, we have to use something like this when we build the variables for that specific job. You want to be able to understand, okay, here's like a variable that, at project level, by default, we don't include anything unless it's just a very specific variable. And then if exists in the allow list, we add it, otherwise not. Right?
If it is in the allow list, we are just.
Yeah, so when we then, let's say we build the variables for the job. So let's say we go to the variables builder. So this, and this is like when a job is enqueued for the runner, this is like afterwards, after when the pipeline is running, we have persisted all this information about the job, but now this job needs to run on the runner. What we do today is like we have to create all the variables, all these environment variables, and send to the runner. Say, here's all the environment variables you have to export in the shell for these jobs to run, right? So currently we export like a absolutely ridiculous like amount of variables today. But you don't want to have certain, the runner for that specific job to have access to things like project level variables and things like that. So
then we don't have a problem.
If it would be more like, okay, we have, as we concatenate variables.
By default, we don't send any project variables. So by default, we don't have any problem, right? I mean, even if your previous example that dust dash, there was a option that in your example in the script. So we don't have a problem because they cannot ever manipulate this variable, because we don't send any project variables or user-defined YAML variables to the runner for this specific compliance job.
Correct. But but we need to make some distinction, like predefined variables, they need to be sent. They need to be sent.
I think we need
variables, YAML variables need to be added there. But there is some other things like secret group level. This one, for example, by default, we will do like if job, policy, and something like that. Okay, if job is policy, policy and job bars allow list, then we add those. If
you are writing this to the group variables. Maybe we should write this to the project variables, right?
I think to both actually.
Both?
Yeah, like the policy could be like a top level group, other project could be like a vested group.
Yeah, I see your
so
point.
it will be like, so if job is not a policy, we'll add it, or if it's a policy and has a parse allow list, then we do this. But of course we have to do some allow list checks here, and the same will be for this one.
Yeah, I see.
And probably even pipeline. Yeah, pipeline schedule variables, any user defined variables.
Yeah,
anything that is not predefined or is not YAML specific variables, then they should be, they can be manipulated by the user, right?
Or the top level group variable, the main group variable that this policy belongs to. We should also pass those variables by default.
Which one?
The group that compliance job belongs to, this policy belongs to. We should send the variables directly to the job.
This is another thing. So if we have the policy defined in a specific project or group, then I think we need to add those.
Just only that group, not the subgroups, that group only. Because Andy just mentioned that, I mean, a policy can be defined in the top level group, but all inherited group also inherits this policy. So
yes,
we should only send the variables from that top level group to the runner.
Yes, okay. Because everything is like isolated, right?
Because if you control that group, you can also control that policy. I mean, you have this access.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so something like this. I mean, it requires refactoring a bit everywhere, so we need to figure it out. But currently, we're just exploring like ideas. But yeah, this is something we don't need to do initially, but we can add it later. The allow list.
Yeah.
But we definitely need to have something to distinguish a normal CI build or trigger, because a trigger can also be added to the policy YAML. You can define this as a trigger. Compliance, you can say compliance pipeline, and I have here trigger local whatever.
What's a trigger?
So the trigger, this will trigger a child pipeline, or a downstream pipeline, but this will be trigger. No, what I'm doing here, trigger include. So this will create like a child pipeline.
Okay.
So rather than adding a lot of jobs to the pipeline, you add one trigger job that this will create a child pipeline. So you just only add one job, and that will have it, the rest of the child pipeline added to the your pipeline.
I'm not sure if you should. You are just writing a policy right now, right?
Yeah, this is like a policy. Imagine this is like a policy. I want to explore all the various ideas.
But
right?
Where is this file stored?
I think this will be on the policy project.
Yeah,
policy project.
Policy project.
I think we should think about it in the next steps, because I think we will end up with another, I don't know, weird conditions for this child pipelines. I'm not sure. Maybe we should just disallow the trigger at all.
Why?
As the initial step. I'm not sure. I don't know why. I mean, I'm just scared that we will end up with another problem with this trigger? We will include if we allow trigger here.
But
Not sure.
the policy YAML can be anything. Anything you can do with the GitLab CI YAML. There is some limitations, like, okay, you can't use, well, actually, there's no limitations currently on that.
I think we limit some top level keywords like stages, for example. But
yes, I think
jobs,
well, but I don't think we need that either, right?
I think we need. I mean, as I also mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I mean, maybe we should only have these two special stages, pre and post. By default, maybe all of the jobs are pre, and if they want, they can also add post jobs here.
Yeah, we came up with this idea of having like 3 reserved stages, like one at the beginning of the pipeline, and one that is injected after the test stage, and then one at the end of the pipeline. And the problem was that we can't merge the stages. Like if the policy defines a list of stages and the project defines a list of stages, I mean, we can merge this list, but it will mess up the order. And there was no like good way to resolve this. So we just thought, okay, we just won't allow any stages definitions in policy, and we just inject those 3 stages.
Yeah, so I think it's always a good idea to have some limitations first, like stages, like trigger. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Okay, but I think we are currently in the exploration stage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and I think it's important that we understand, could we move into that direction? So this is what I'm trying to do. Using all these examples, because we have to figure out, can we move to that direction? If we realize that, okay, it will be very difficult to move towards that direction, then it means the pattern we are choosing is, it's a limiting us in the future. So we arrive, we hit a wall and we can't make progress anymore. So what I'm saying is, like, we need to aim for allowing any syntax in the policy YAML, right? Especially if we do evaluate as a separate context. Even if here I do stages, I do test 1, test 2, right? Stage test 1. What can happen here? Like, if the single source of truth for defining stages is the GitLab CI YAML, in the end, with the jobs we are adding here, we are going to discard this. When we take the data structure of this policy YAML, we discard stages, right? The stage test 1 makes sense in the context of this file, but once we take this file and we add it to the pipeline, then we, this is what I was saying earlier with that in the config, but maybe it's on the config somewhere else, that add job method. You are adding a job with a specific stage, and that can be this invariance where we can check this kind of preconditions. Say, okay, you want to add a job to test 1 stage, but test 1 stage doesn't exist in this pipeline. So actually you fail with a syntax error in that case, right? So in theory, you could do it if you want, but it's like at your own risk, right? If you want to do something like that. You could use by default, for example, the test stage if you want, and enforce that this job always runs at the test stage. If somebody has a project that doesn't define the test stage, they'll get an error. It's like try to balance between simplicity, make something simple, but give control to the users and responsibility to the users, rather than trying to block a lot of things. But then once we want to unblock these things, it becomes difficult for us to do it. So if we can aim for, allowing anything, making the concept simple, and trying to understand here what the complexity is, right? So in the case of stage of a trigger, yeah, what is the problem with supporting bridge jobs, right? If we evaluate this in isolation and then we add the bridge job to the pipeline, what is the problem? I think we still have to make sure that this trigger job is set as policy job true, because we need to understand, okay, this is coming from the policy.
But by the way, are we continuing this meeting right now? Because I need to drop either way. So I have a public holiday tomorrow, but I still can join if we do this at the same time tomorrow. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I have a public holiday tomorrow too. But I think actually I have enough content now to think about and to improve the POC. So I think I would like to start working on the chain and try to put the policies into the chain instead of the config, and then maybe we can go from there. I can try to update the POC. Currently, I want to create a few. So we have an epic now for the new policy type, and I want to create all these issues just for the case my parental leave starts, so someone else can take over. So I will do this first, and then I will look into the POC and see how we can put the policies into the chain. And maybe we can do another session next week.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we have our weekly meeting next week anyway. So
I will be away next week, but you two feel free to join and dig more.
Yep. Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds
cool.
Good.
I can just drop you a message once I need help or I have something to show, and then we can find a good time.
Andy, just one thing before we log off is, could we update the blueprint with this kind of, what the discussions we had today and what we discussed yesterday also with Grant, speak about principles, what we expect to have, maybe have those documented in the blueprint. We want to have, simplicity in the GitLab CI YAML. You should be able to do anything with the policy YAML, or jobs that are added from policy needs to be explicitly marked as coming from we need to, have a provenance, clear provenance from where this job come from, so we can treat them differently and things like that. So maybe we need to update the blueprint with this kind of discussions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, I can do that.
Okay,
awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.